This is Sky News Tonight. Our top stories. Prosecutors in Paris say a man shot dead as he tried to enter a police station waving a knife and wearing a fake suicide vest was carrying the emblem of the Islamic State. Sky News can reveal that British military experts are helping Saudi Arabia conduct its campaign against Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen. The Syrian government has agreed to allow aid into the town of Madaya, where over 30,000 people are reportedly starving to death.
Well, today's incident at a Paris police station took place when the city was already on high alert. Parisians were remembering the Charlie Hebdo attack in which 12 people were killed a year ago, just days before 4 hostages died in a supermarket siege. Then came November's multiple terror attacks in which 130 people were killed in the city. It has led many to question why Paris. Is there a reason that the French capital appears to be a target of recent terror atrocities? Well, with me to discuss this is Olivier Guita, an international security and risk consultant, and also Nabila Ramdani, a French-Algerian journalist. Good evening to you both. Let's put that question to you, Olivier Guita. Why Paris?
A couple of reasons. The first one being that since September 2014, Islamic State spokesman Al-Adnani called specifically for attacks on France. France is #1 target enemy of the Islamic State next to the US. It has waged wars against Islamists in Mali. It has been very strong on military action against jihadists throughout the world, and especially against Islamic State, both in Iraq and since September in Syria. So
foreign policy is a key factor in this. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And let's not forget that well before France's recent military intervention in Syria, France had been at the forefront in the fight against global Islamic terrorism by intervening in countries like Mali, the Central African Republic, or on other fronts to a certain extent like the Sahel region.
And President Hollande is proud of that interventionist approach, isn't he, where others have perhaps stood back?
Yes, absolutely. He's very hawkish when it comes to his foreign policy, and he's literally put himself at the center, right at the center of this fight against global terrorism. And there is evidence also that the young men who carried out terror attacks in France have been radicalized by foreign wars. They've often traveled to Syria, for example, and that's how they get radicalized, and that's why they train, for example, to use weapons. And they often quote attacks on countries like Syria or Iraq, which by Western countries, including France, which make civilian casualties in those countries. And that's the kind of things they often quote when they themselves carry out attacks.
This is something that every nation dreads, isn't it? That national citizens are radicalized in Syria, for example, but it's when they return home that they pose such a threat.
Yes, very much so. I mean, if you look at the numbers, France has still the highest contingent of Western European fighters in Syria. Up to 2,000 French nationals have gone to Syria and Iraq to join either Islamic State or Al-Nusra Front. But to put that in perspective, France has the largest Muslim population in Europe as well. So in relative terms, Belgium is much more dramatic in terms of the number of people going there.
Okay, so let's pick up on that point. The largest Muslim population, one of the largest Muslim populations in Europe, but it's internal problems in France, that feeling of isolation, exclusion. There is a divided society, isn't there, Olivier?
A couple of things. I mean, you have to remember that historically there's been Islamic terrorism touching into France since the 1980s. The fact of the matter is that it is true that jihadists are using the fact that they view France as an Islamophobic country as well to basically say it's a legitimate target, you should go after them. So they cite the law on the hijab ban as one of the main points showing how France is supposedly Islamophobic.
Nabila, is France Islamophobic?
Well, I think there's certainly, one of the problems that France has is internally, as you quite rightly said, it has to do with how France treats its ethnic and religious minorities, especially those who come from former colonies of France.
And Paris has been at the heart of that, hasn't it, with the banlieue, the suburbs, the problems that have been seen over years there.
And there's no question that there is a tiny minority of highly radicalized young men who invariably have been in prison, who have been under surveillance, who are on security files, and who see violence as a means to sort out the grievances. And that includes, it has to be said, the mood in France, which has a very right-wing political agenda, and that includes, applies to all parties, including the Socialist Party. And France has had very serious economic problems, and immigrants have been perceived as part of the problem. Ergo, people coming from former colonies are also given a bad time. And as Olivier quite rightly said, there's also this idea that France, there's no such thing as the live and let live approach to communities that we have here in Britain. There has been an awful lot of stigmatization by the French political class, including through the introduction of measures like the burqa ban or ban on halal meat, or the way people pray, for example. And that has been also one of the grievances of people who are drawn to this kind of terrifying groups like ISIS, again, as a means to fight back effectively. But it has to be said that France, although it's a secular country, secularism by no means means the suppression of the expression of religious belief, and instead France should be creating an atmosphere where all beliefs are allowed to flourish. And yet there has been constant stigmatization of certain communities.
And one final point, Olivier, what about the geography, porous borders?
This is one of the main issues. I mean, Islamic State made a case just a month before November attacks to their followers to specifically target neighboring countries rather than your home country. And that's not by chance that even if the perpetrators of the attack in Paris were French citizens, they were based in Belgium.
Okay, Olivier and Nabila, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.